Set. All right, everybody ready? Okay, good morning. I'm going to turn things over this morning to Lieutenant Butler.
All right, good morning. I'm Lieutenant Nick Butler. I'm the lieutenant for the Crimes Against Persons section of the Detective Bureau of the Sioux Falls Police Department. As you may know, over the weekend we had we made some progress on the death of Paul Billion, which occurred back in August. So I'm just going to give a real quick overview to kind of bring everybody up to speed on how that began and how we got to where we are here today. So our investigation into Paul Billion's death began August 19th of 2022, so just under 4 months ago. We responded to Mr. Billion's address in the 1300 block of South Duluth after a family had gone to check on him and found him deceased. Over the course of the last nearly 4 months, our detectives have spent hundreds of hours working towards finding out who was responsible for Mr. Billion's death, and that was a tall order, being that there were no, Mr. Billion had been dead for a couple days at that point, and we didn't have any witnesses, and really didn't have a whole lot of information to go on. But we've, through the use of a lot of technology, and frankly just a whole lot of good old-fashioned police work, talking to people in the community, walking around the neighborhoods, picking up evidence, collecting evidence, executing a number of different search warrants. On Saturday, we had beginning of last week, we had become comfortable with the information that we had gathered, and we met with the Minnehaha County State's Attorney's Office. We conferenced and went over all that information and felt comfortable with applying for arrest warrants and a couple search warrants as well. Things kind of came to a head on Saturday morning. We were granted those warrants through the judicial process and began executing the arrest warrants and the search warrants at that time. Over the course of about the next 18 hours, detectives executed search warrants in the 1300 block of South Center Avenue, the 6100 block of West 43rd Street, and the 3800 block of South Hawthorne Avenue, all within the Sioux Falls city limits. At the conclusion of those warrants, we had arrested 4 people in connection with Mr. Billion's death. I'll provide you the names. I'll let Sam send out the exact spelling and whatnot afterwards. And I apologize if I mispronounce any of the names. But the first person was first name Gabo, last name Yu, date of birth 5/16/03. He was charged with first-degree murder, burglary first degree, and grand theft. Thomas Tarley, 12/7/2003. He was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree burglary. This next person's name is Sotiman Poli, date of birth 8/10/04, charged with first-degree murder and grand theft. And Carnell Jimerson, 10/9/03, charged with grand theft. Now, each of those people played a different role within causing Mr. Billion's death, and that'll all be worked out here. There are a couple things that I wanted to note in this. Obviously, this took a lot of time, and that's because of the nature of this business, and that's because of the circumstances surrounding this. Again, we were kind of behind the 8 ball to begin with because this happened a couple days prior. It appears that the root of this crime was drug related, and that this was a robbery that had turned out differently than, I'm guessing, the robbers or Mr. Billion had suspected that this would end up. Nonetheless, it does highlight some of the issues that surround the drug issues that we're seeing within our community, and that's why we continue to work hard. Our narcotics division, our patrol division, our street crimes unit, everybody's working hard to help kind of keep that under control. And it highlights a point that very importantly that Officer Clemens hits on a weekly or monthly basis, and that's the security of our firearms and the responsibility that the public has to keep our firearms secured. It's believed that the gun that was used to kill Mr. Billion had been stolen out of a vehicle earlier in the year. So we do have a responsibility, everyone who's a gun owner, to make sure that we're keeping those firearms in a safe place. We're not leaving them in unlocked cars or someplace where an opportunistic criminal might have a mind to grab that, right? It's not just the theft of the firearm that's important, it's what happens to that firearm and how it gets used afterwards that we need to be considering. We need to thank the public for their cooperation in this case. There are only so many detectives working, and no matter how many hours they put in, we still need the assistance of the community when it comes to solving homicides and every crime, frankly. If you see something that's suspicious, we ask that you report that and let us look into it. And I think in this case, and in all homicide cases, and a majority of crimes, although we're done with, and we've made an arrest here in this instance, that doesn't mean that we're done investigating. There's still a significant amount of work that needs to be done, and that will happen between now and when this case goes to trial. So now that you know the names of the people that were involved, and you know kind of the date range that we're looking at here, if there's something that's popping into your mind, something that you saw, something that you recognize may be of benefit to our case, we ask that you still continue to call in with those tips. And that brings me to my last point, and that is that we do still have one unsolved homicide out there, and that is Mr. Tunis Lomax. And this case highlights a couple different things. One is that although it seems like time has gone on and a lot of time has passed, we will not stop investigating these cases until we find the people that are responsible for causing injury and death to the people that we serve in this community. And we continue to ask for anybody with information in the Tunis Lomax case to please come forward and share that information with us so that we can come to the same result, same conclusion in that case as well. We need the public's help. So, are there any questions?
Can you tell us what kind of drugs were involved?
What kind of drugs? Mm-hmm. I believe it's marijuana in this case.
Has the suspected murder weapon been recovered by police?
That's we collected a lot of evidence in these search warrants, and that's part of what's going to continue to happen over the next weeks and months. Is that we need to process the evidence that we've collected, and firearms being one of them. We're confident that we know which firearm was used, and so we just need to make do some lab work and that type of thing with the assistance of the state lab to make sure that we're identifying that correctly. So I don't have that information at this time.
In this case, was Pavilion selling marijuana or drugs to the suspects?
That's not something that any information that we have, no.
How about the fourth guy? What was his involvement? Jimison?
So that's going to be related to the theft of firearms. Yep.
But he wasn't with them.
I don't believe that he was with them during the time of the homicide, but he played a role in how this ended up in the end. All right, I'll turn it over to Chief Toom.
Yeah, thanks. Lieutenant Butler said it absolutely. There's nothing really much more to add, but I just would be remiss if I didn't say we have the luxury sometimes of solving homicides within hours. And I think we've covered a couple this year that have gone pretty quick, and sometimes we get a little bit accustomed to that's how it works. The reality is that each case is uniquely different and may take time. And with this one, I just can't say how proud I am of our team and the work they put into this, because really they had very little to go on from the start. And the investigation and the work done by the detectives, along with every other section of our department, just really, really proud of their efforts, because without their hard work, professionalism, and dedication, we don't get results like we got over the weekend. And I think Lieutenant Butler said this too. Things take time. We never stop, and we never stop pursuing that information. And again, it just takes time, and the communities, we appreciate their patience, and then they also recognize that as well. Additionally to what he said, again, we will continue to pursue information on this in both the Tunis Lomax homicide. And if there are people within the community, especially now that recognizing this name, the truth ultimately comes out. And we would appreciate if you get yourself on the appropriate side of the truth, if you have information that will help us out with either of these investigations. Again, praise the professionalism and work of our team, their dedication, and can't say how proud I am of their work, and really can't stress that enough. Thank you. You got a quick question?
Yeah, just, there's a number of people now that probably are connecting dots and going,
Yeah.
whoa. How important is that some of them come forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, again, things that, and Lieutenant Butler said this as well, dots get connected, people get their memory jogged a little bit, or they remember things that may or may not feel that was significant at the time, but now seems pretty significant. So if they have any information like that, or can help us connect a few further dots, because there's still a lot of work to do as far as making sure we process the evidence and produce the best case possible. So yeah, if you have that information, Crime Stoppers, even if you don't want to communicate directly, Crime Stoppers is always there. It's a great source of tips, and we've broken a lot of cases. Not speaking specifically about this one, but just Crime Stoppers information has been huge for us. So an active community is a safer community, and again, we want to really, appeal to people to be active, and if they have information that they're providing it to us. So, thank you.
Okay, excuse me. We got quite a few aggravated assaults. Most of those are domestics. We had people that were threatened, some strangulation cases. We did have one that was an injury. This was in the 4000 block of East Hayes Place. This was a couple of guys that know each other. Our victim was inside his room. The suspect came into his room and essentially began assaulting him. At one point, the suspect pulled out a knife and cut the victim. He had injuries, non-life-threatening injuries. Let me see here. It was to his head, and then he had a small cut to his hand as well. But I think he went to the hospital on his own. The hand was probably a little bit more serious, where he may have required some stitches. The wound to his head, there was no medical attention needed. But suspect was still there when the officers arrived, so he was arrested. One count of aggravated assault, and this was Sunday night about 10:30 is when that took place. Do you want the suspect's name?
Yes, please.
Excuse me. Last name is Delgado Ponce, Delgado Ponce. First is Alfredo, Alfredo. No middle name. He's 42 from Sioux Falls.
And what was the location of that center?
That was the 4000 block of East Hayes Place,
And is that an apartment or a house?
trailer home.
Sure.
Not much else from those aggravated assaults. The arson, that was some garbage cans that were set on fire. I think there was a couch near them as well. Outside of the garbage cans, there was no damage to anything, no suspects found in that case. Burglaries, we had a couple of garages and then another building that was entered. One of them I don't have reports on yet. Disorderlies, really nothing of note there, basically just reports. The embezzlement was a car that was loaned out. Family offenses had some domestics, protection order violations, stalking cases. Forgery was a bad check. The frauds had one unlocked car, had a wallet taken. There was a bill skip, a fake 100, and then a few other reports. Larcenies I didn't have a chance to get to. Narcotics, no big quantities. The rapes are all reports. The robbery, the first one, this was Saturday night, about 11 p.m. That was at 14th in Minnesota. Our victim was inside a bathroom in the convenience store. There's a couple of guys that basically came in the bathroom. I'm not sure if there was anything that led up to it or not, but once inside there, they ended up stabbing the suspect. He had wounds to his back. They took his hat and then left. There was a language barrier, so officers were doing their best they could, but we haven't got all the details yet. But it sounds like from other witnesses that there was really no connection between the victim and the suspect, so I'm not sure what more was said. The victim was taken to the hospital by ambulance, so the officers didn't have a chance to get any great detail from him. But the injuries were non-life threatening. We're still working on trying to figure out who the suspects were. The second robbery, that was Saturday, just before 5 p.m. And I think the suspect in this case looks like he had been kind of causing problems in the area, 17th and Minnesota. We had a woman that was at Subway, and as she left the business, or had just received her sandwich, and she was going to leave, and then the suspect came in. He had been outside banging on the window earlier. He basically walked up to her and intimidated her, and then grabbed her sandwich and then left. Officers were dealing with him from another call when they learned of this, so he was arrested for robbery and disorderly conduct. There's no injury, no force, it was just the intimidation, so that's why we had the robbery charge. Do you want his name? Yes, no, yes, okay. His last name is Luchtenberg, Luchtenburg. First is Peter, Peter. Middle is Frank, Frank, and he's 33 from Sioux Falls. Sex offenses are reports, and quite a few sex offenders didn't change their address, so reports on that. The simple assaults, nothing big out of those, just more reports and domestics. Nothing suspicious with the unattended death. Vandalisms, I didn't have a chance to get to those. The weapons violation, the first one, that was, had some people heard some gunshots in the neighborhood, and one person found a house had been shot. The bullet did not travel through the wall. There were 3 casings that were found, but no suspects. And the other last weapons violation, that was a domestic, and I didn't have any reports this morning yet on it, so I think they're still working on that case. That's all I have, unless you guys have anything else.
Did you get an email from me?
I did.
Did you have a follow-up on that or not?
It's still under investigation. So that was the at the Gateway Lounge in October, I believe. Is that right?
Yep.
That was the call. Was a guy that was unconscious, and there was some, I guess, different information about what took place. There, it sounds like after interviewing people, there may have been an assault that took place. We're still working on sorting all that information out. The victim ended up passing from injuries. There was an autopsy that was done, but the coroner is still working on that. So we don't have